hung up the phone, my hands trembling as the weight of Aunt Miriam's words sank in. "I'm cutting you out of my will. After how you treated me, you deserve nothing." The line went dead, but her bitter condemnation echoed in my mind. Kyle stormed into the living room, his face flushed with anger. What did that old bat say now? I swallowed hard, bracing myself for his outburst. "She's taking me out of her will, cutting me off completely." "What?" Kyle slammed his fist on the coffee table, making me flinch. "After everything we've done for her? The ungrateful hag!" My chest tightened as memories of Aunt Miriam's kindness resurfaced. She had been more of a mother to me than my own parents, taking me in after their tragic deaths. Her home became my sanctuary, her love a constant in my turbulent childhood. But that love had twisted into resentment over the years, poisoned by Kyle's relentless demands for money and favors. I had gone along too weak to stand up to him and his overbearing parents. "This is your fault," Kyle spat, his eyes blazing with accusation. "You never stood up for us, never fought for what's ours." Shame washed over me as I recalled the countless times I had enabled his greed, sacrificing my bond with Aunt Miriam for his empty promises of a lavish inheritance. I had been a coward, too afraid to defy him and lose the illusion of wealth he dangled before me. "We're not going to take this lying down," Kyle snarled, his voice laced with determination. "That money is rightfully ours, and we're going to get it back, one way or another." As he stormed out, I sank onto the couch, my mind racing with memories of Aunt Miriam's unwavering love and support. How had I let it come to this? How had I allowed myself to become so consumed by greed and selfishness, betraying the woman who had given me everything? The weight of my guilt was suffocating, but deep down I knew the truth. I had brought this upon myself, and as the gravity of my actions settled in, I couldn't help but wonder if there was any way to undo the damage I had caused, or if I had lost Aunt Miriam forever. The apartment felt suffocating, the weight of Aunt Miriam's rejection pressing down on me. I needed air, an escape from Kyle's seething rage and the memories that taunted me. Grabbing my coat, I slipped out, the crisp night offering a fleeting reprieve. As I wandered aimlessly, flashes of my childhood flickered through my mind. The night Dad didn't come home from work, Mom's anguished sobs as the police delivered the tragic news. The deafening silence that followed, an emptiness no 9-year-old should ever have to endure. Then Aunt Miriam's warm embrace, her gentle voice soothing my fears. "You're safe now, sweetheart. I'm here for you." She had been my lifeline, my anchor in the storm that threatened to sweep me away. Her modest home became a sanctuary, filled with the love and stability I had so desperately craved. But even then, the seeds of greed had taken root, planted by Kyle's manipulative parents. "That old lady's loaded," they would sneer. "Just you wait, Trina. One day, that fortune will be yours." Foolishly, I had let their poisonous words take hold, blinding me to Miriam's unconditional love. And as the years passed, Kyle's demands grew more insistent, his parents' influence more toxic. "She owes us," he would snarl, his eyes glinting with avarice. "After everything we've done for her, sacrificing our own lives to take care of that ungrateful hag." I knew it was a lie, a twisted justification for his greed. But I was too weak, too afraid to stand up to him, to risk losing the illusion of wealth he dangled before me like a carrot on a string. "Trina, darling," Aunt Miriam would plead, her eyes brimming with hurt. "I've given you everything I have. Why isn't it enough?" But her words fell on deaf ears, drowned out by Kyle's incessant demands and the siren song of his parents' promises of riches beyond my wildest dreams. Now, as I wandered the empty streets, the weight of my betrayal threatened to crush me. I had sacrificed the one person who had truly loved me, the one constant in my life, for the hollow allure of material wealth. Aunt Miriam's words echoed in my mind, a haunting reminder of the depth of my transgression. "You deserve nothing." And in that moment, I knew she was right. I had brought this upon myself, and the only one to blame was the person staring back at me in the cold, unforgiving reflection of the storefront window. The sound of Aunt Miriam's labored breathing filled the stifling hospital room. I shifted uncomfortably in the hard plastic chair, guilt gnawing at my insides as I watched her frail form struggle for each ragged breath. "You came," she whispered, her eyes flickering open, a glimmer of hope in their tired depths. I forced a smile, unable to meet her gaze. "Of course, Aunt Miriam. Where else would I be?" Her bony hand trembled as she reached for mine, and I flinched, the weight of my deceit threatening to crush me. "I'm so sorry, dear," she rasped, her voice barely audible. "I never meant for things to end up like this." My throat constricted, the words I longed to say, the apology I owed her, stuck like shards of glass. But Kyle's voice echoed in my mind, a constant reminder of the price of defiance. "Don't be ridiculous," I managed, forcing a hollow laugh. "You've done more than enough for me already." Aunt Miriam's face fell, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "But I wanted to give you everything, Trina, to make up for all the heartache you've endured." The guilt was suffocating, a vice around my chest that squeezed tighter with each shallow breath she took. I should have been the one comforting her, reassuring her that her love and support had been enough, more than enough. But the words never came. Instead, I sat in silence, a coward too afraid to break free from the chains of greed that bound me. Later that night, as Aunt Miriam slept fitfully, Kyle stormed into the room, his face contorted with rage. "Well?" he hissed, his eyes darting to the fragile figure in the hospital bed. "Did you get through to her? Make her see reason?" I shook my head, unable to meet his accusatory glare. "Useless," he spat, slamming his fist against the wall. "We're running out of time, Trina. That money is ours, and I'm not going to let some senile old bat stand in our way." His words cut deep, but I knew there was truth in them. We had sacrificed too much, endured too many years of her empty promises and hollow gratitude. It was time to take matters into our own hands. As Kyle ranted, his voice rising with each venomous syllable, I caught a flicker of movement from the corner of my eye. Aunt Miriam's lids fluttered open, her gaze locking onto mine, a lifetime of hurt and betrayal reflected in those weary eyes. In that moment, I knew there was no going back. The fragile bond between us, once so strong and unbreakable, had been severed. And as the harsh reality of my actions washed over me, I couldn't help but wonder if I had lost her forever. The shrill ring of the phone sliced through the tense silence, shattering the fragile calm that had settled over our apartment. Kyle shot me a pointed glare as I reached for the receiver, his jaw clenched in silent warning. "Hello?" My voice trembled with trepidation. "Trina?" The nurse's voice was grave, laced with urgency. "It's your Aunt Miriam. There's been an incident. You need to come to the hospital right away." My heart plummeted, a cold dread washing over me. "What happened? Is she okay?" A weighted pause, then. "She's fallen. Hit her head pretty hard. The doctors are doing everything they can, but—" She trailed off, the unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. The line went dead, but the implications lingered, a suffocating weight pressing down on my chest. I turned to Kyle, my mouth dry, struggling to find the words. "Well?" he snapped, his eyes narrowing with impatience. "What is it?" "It's Aunt Miriam," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. She's hurt. Bad." For a fleeting moment, a flicker of concern crossed his features, quickly extinguished by the ever-present hunger that burned in his eyes. "How bad?" he demanded, leaning forward, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the armrests of his chair. I swallowed hard, the gravity of the situation threatening to crush me. "They didn't say, just that we need to get to the hospital right away?" Kyle's nostrils flared, his lips curling into a sneer. "Of course they didn't," he spat, rising to his feet with a suddenness that made me flinch. "They're probably just trying to milk us for more money, the vultures." His words hung in the air, a bitter accusation that stung like a slap to the face. I opened my mouth to protest, but the words died on my tongue, withering under the weight of his scathing glare. "Well?" he barked, grabbing his coat from the rack with a forceful tug. "Are you coming or not? We can't let this opportunity slip through our fingers." Opportunity. The word left a sour taste in my mouth, a stark reminder of the depths to which we had sunk. Aunt Miriam was lying in a hospital bed, her life hanging in the balance, and all Kyle could think about was the inheritance that dangled before us like a tantalizing prize. But what choice did I have? I had made my bed long ago, sacrificing my principles and self-respect for the hollow promise of wealth and security. And now, as the consequences of my actions loomed ever closer, I found myself trapped, a prisoner of my own greed and cowardice. With leaden steps, I followed Kyle out the door, the weight of my guilt growing heavier with each stride. As we made our way to the hospital, the silence between us was deafening, punctuated only by the occasional muttered curse or impatient sigh. And through it all, a single thought echoed in my mind, a haunting refrain that chilled me to the core. What had I done? The antiseptic stench of the hospital corridor assaulted my senses as we made our way down the sterile hallway, each step echoing like a death knell. Kyle strode ahead, his gait determined, his eyes fixed on the prize that lay beyond the closed door at the end of the corridor. I trailed behind, my footsteps leaden, weighed down by the guilt that threatened to consume me. Aunt Miriam's fragile form flashed before my eyes, a haunting reminder of the depths to which I had sunk in my pursuit of her wealth. As we neared the room, the muffled sounds of voices drifted through the door. Nurses and doctors, their tones hushed and grave. A knot twisted in my stomach, but Kyle pressed on, undeterred. Without preamble, he flung open the door, the hinges protesting with a shrill creak. All eyes turned towards us, a dozen faces etched with shock and disapproval. "Well?" Kyle barked, his gaze sweeping the room with a callous indifference. "What are you all gawking at? Where is she?" A nurse stepped forward, her expression a mixture of pity and thinly veiled disdain. "Mrs. Winslow is resting," she said, her voice clipped. "She's been through quite an ordeal and needs her rest." Kyle scoffed, brushing past her with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Resting? She'll have plenty of time for that once we get her affairs in order." My heart hammered in my chest as he approached the bed, his shadow looming over Aunt Miriam's frail form. She looked so small, so vulnerable, her face pale and drawn, marred by a vivid purple bruise that bloomed across her forehead. "Aunt Miriam," Kyle crooned, his tone sickly sweet. "It's us, your favorite niece and nephew." Her eyes fluttered open, glazed and unfocused. A flicker of recognition passed across her features, quickly extinguished by a wince of pain. "Kyle," she rasped, her voice little more than a whisper. "Trina, you came." "Of course we did," Kyle replied, shooting me a pointed glare. "We're family after all, and family looks out for one another, don't they?" A tremor ran through me as the implication of his words sank in. This was it, the moment we had been waiting for, the opportunity to secure our future once and for all. "That's why," Kyle continued, his tone taking on a harder edge, "we need to have a little chat about your affairs, your will, your assets, everything." Aunt Miriam's brow furrowed, her eyes growing wide with alarm. "My will?" she echoed, her voice trembling. But I thought." "You thought what?" Kyle snapped, his veneer of concern cracking like a brittle mask. "That we'd just let you squander everything you've worked for? That we'd stand idly by while you frittered it all away on frivolous nonsense?" His words hung in the air, a damning accusation that cut straight to the bone. I wanted to protest, to defend Aunt Miriam's honor, but the words stuck in my throat, choked by the weight of my own complicity. As Kyle raged on, his voice rising to a fever pitch, I caught sight of the nurse hovering nearby, her expression a mixture of horror and disgust. In that moment, I knew we had crossed a line, one from which there was no turning back. And as the harsh reality of our actions washed over me, I couldn't help but wonder if we had finally gone too far, if the price of our greed was too steep, even for us. The crisp autumn air did little to soothe the burning ache in my chest as I made my way up the familiar path to Aunt Miriam's home. Each step felt heavier than the last, weighed down by the burden of shame and regret that had become my constant companion. As the stately manor came into view, memories assailed me, happy times spent in its warmth and comfort before greed had poisoned everything. I could almost hear the echoes of Aunt Miriam's laughter, the gentle melodies she would hum as she tended to her beloved garden. But those days were gone, lost to the relentless march of time and our own selfish desires. The door swung open before I could raise my hand to knock, and there she stood, Aunt Miriam, her once vibrant eyes now dulled by a mix of sorrow and resignation. "Trina," she said, her voice little more than a hoarse whisper, "I've been expecting you." I opened my mouth, but no words came. What could I possibly say to undo the hurt, the betrayal we had inflicted upon her? "Come in," she sighed, turning and disappearing into the dimly lit interior. I followed, each step feeling like a descent into the depths of my own personal hell. The once inviting foyer was now a mausoleum, the air thick with the weight of shattered dreams and broken promises. Aunt Miriam sank into her favorite armchair, her movements slow and labored, a stark contrast to the vibrant woman I remembered. She gestured for me to sit, her gaze unwavering, piercing straight through to my soul. "I know why you're here," she said, her voice barely audible above the ticking of the grandfather clock. "You want to know about the will." My heart hammered in my chest, the familiar ache of greed and longing stirring within me. This was it, the moment we had been waiting for, the opportunity to secure our future once and for all. But as I opened my mouth to speak, Aunt Miriam raised a trembling hand, silencing me before the words could leave my lips. "Don't bother," she said, her eyes hardening with a resolve I had never seen before. "I've made my decision, and nothing you or that wretched husband of yours can say will change it." A chill ran down my spine, her words cutting deeper than any knife. This was no idle threat. I could see it in the set of her jaw, the steely determination that burned in her gaze. "You're cutting us out?" I managed, my voice little more than a strangled whisper. Aunt Miriam's lips curved into a humorless smile, a bitter twist of the knife. "Cutting you out?" she echoed, her tone laced with a mix of pity and contempt. "My dear, you cut yourselves out long ago, the moment you decided that money and possessions were more important than family, than love." Her words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the wind from my lungs and leaving me gasping for air. I wanted to protest, to defend our actions, but deep down, I knew she was right. We had brought this upon ourselves, sacrificing everything that truly mattered for the hollow allure of wealth and status. As the weight of her condemnation settled over me, I felt the last vestiges of hope slip away, replaced by a cold, bitter resignation. We had played the game, and we had lost. Spectacularly, irrevocably. And as I looked into Aunt Miriam's eyes, I saw not anger or hatred, but a profound sadness, a mourning for the family we had once been, and the love we had so carelessly squandered. In that moment, I knew there was no going back, no undoing the damage we had wrought. The only path left was forward, into the desolate wasteland of our own making. The deafening silence that hung over our apartment was suffocating, broken only by the occasional muffled sob or the clink of a glass against the coffee table. Kyle sat hunched in his chair, his eyes glazed and unfocused, a half-empty tumbler of amber liquid clutched in his trembling hand. "This can't be happening," he muttered, his words slurred and thick. "Not after everything we've sacrificed." I said nothing, my own grief and shame rendering me mute. Aunt Miriam's words echoed in my mind, a damning refrain that played on an endless loop. "You cut yourselves out long ago." How had it come to this? How had our relentless pursuit of wealth and status twisted us into the very monsters we had sworn never to become? A bitter chuckle escaped Kyle's lips, jarring me from my reverie. "Well," he sneered, fixing me with a glare that cut straight to the bone. "Aren't you going to say something? Or are you just going to sit there like a pathetic lump, as useless as ever?" I flinched, his words like a physical blow. A part of me wanted to lash out, to defend myself against his vitriol, but what was the point? He was right. I was useless, a coward too afraid to stand up to him and his insatiable greed. "We're not going to let this stand, you know," he growled, slamming his glass down with such force that I half expected it to shatter. "That money is ours. Damn it. We've earned it, sacrificed everything for it." A bitter laugh escaped my lips before I could stop it. "Earned it?" I echoed, my voice dripping with contempt. "Is that what you call it? Leeching off of Aunt Miriam's generosity, bleeding her dry with our constant demands and ingratitude?" Kyle's eyes widened, his face flushing with rage. "How dare you?" he spat, surging to his feet and looming over me like a menacing shadow. "After everything I've done for you, for this family?" I met his gaze, unflinching. "You mean everything you've done to tear this family apart?" I shot back, my own anger rising to the surface like a tidal wave. "Face it, Kyle, we brought this on ourselves. We let greed and selfishness consume us, and now we're paying the price." His hand lashed out, the back of his palm connecting with my cheek with a sickening crack. I recoiled, stars exploding across my vision as the metallic tang of blood filled my mouth. "You ungrateful bitch," he snarled, towering over me like a wrathful giant. "After everything I've given you, this is how you repay me." I said nothing, cradling my throbbing cheek as the weight of his words washed over me. He was right. He had given me everything, or at least the illusion of it. A life of comfort and luxury, dangled before me like a carrot on a string, always just out of reach. And in my desperation to grasp it, I had sacrificed the one thing that truly mattered: my integrity, my soul. As Kyle raged on, his voice rising to a fever pitch, I felt something within me shift, a profound weariness settling over me like a shroud. I was done, finished with the lies and the endless cycle of greed and recrimination. Slowly, I rose to my feet, my movements steady and resolute. Kyle fell silent, his eyes narrowing with suspicion as I met his gaze, unflinching. "It's over, Kyle," I said, my voice low but laced with a steely determination. "No more begging, no more pleading. We made our bed, and now we have to lie in it." His lips curled into a sneer, but I could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes, the first cracks in his armor of bravado. "You're really going to let that old hag win?" He spat, his words laced with venom. "After everything we've been through?" I said nothing, simply turned and walked away, leaving him to stew in his own bitter juices. It was time to start over, to rebuild from the ashes of our shattered dreams and broken promises. And this time, I vowed, greed and selfishness would have no place in my life. This time, I would be the master of my own destiny. The harsh glare of the neon open sign cast a sickly glow over the dingy diner, its flickering light a beacon for the weary souls who sought refuge within its cracked vinyl booths. I slid into one of the worn seats, the faded upholstery creaking in protest beneath my weight. The waitress, a world-weary woman with eyes like smudged charcoal, ambled over, her pen poised over a grease-stained pad. "What'll it be, hon?" she drawled, her voice a raspy monotone. I opened my mouth, but the words caught in my throat, a lump of shame and regret rendering me mute. How had it come to this? How had I fallen so far from the gilded halls of opulence to the grim underbelly of despair? The waitress arched an eyebrow, her patience wearing thin. "Look, sweetheart, I ain't got all night. You want something or not?" I forced a nod, my throat constricting as I choked out the words. "Just coffee, black." She shrugged, scribbling on her pad before shuffling away, leaving me alone with the weight of my thoughts. Aunt Miriam's face flashed before my mind's eye, her once vibrant features etched with disappointment and sorrow. "You cut yourselves out long ago," she had said, her words a death knell for our dreams of wealth and comfort. And she had been right. We had brought this upon ourselves, sacrificing everything for the hollow allure of material gain. Now, as the bitter consequences of our actions bore down upon us, I found myself adrift, cast out into the unforgiving wilderness with nothing but the tattered remnants of my pride. The clink of ceramic against formica jolted me from my reverie. The waitress had returned, a steaming mug of black coffee in her hand. She set it down with a thud, sloshing some of the inky liquid over the rim and onto the battered tabletop. "There you go, hon," she muttered, already turning away. "Holler if you need anything else." I nodded numbly, my fingers curling around the warm mug as if seeking solace in its simple familiarity. As the rich aroma wafted up, mingling with the stale scent of grease and despair, a memory surfaced, unbidden. Aunt Miriam's kitchen, the gentle clatter of dishes and the comforting gurgle of the coffee pot, her soft humming, a soothing melody that would chase away the shadows of my turbulent childhood, the warmth of her embrace, her whispered words of love and reassurance. A solitary tear traced its way down my cheek, mingling with the bitter brew as I raised the mug to my lips. How I had squandered that love, trampled upon it in my blind pursuit of riches and status. The diner door swung open with a jangle, admitting a gust of chill night air and a familiar figure. Kyle, his once immaculate suit now rumpled and stained, his eyes hollow and haunted. He spotted me, his lips curling into a sneer as he made his way over, his gait unsteady. Well, he slurred, sliding into the booth across from me. "If it isn't the prodigal wife, slumming it with the dregs of society." I said nothing, simply took another sip of my coffee, the bitter liquid scalding my tongue. Kyle leaned forward, his breath hot and sour with the reek of cheap whiskey. "What's the matter, Trina?" he taunted, his voice dripping with venom. "Cat got your tongue? Or have you finally realized the depths of your failure, your utter uselessness?" His words cut deep, but I refused to rise to the bait. I had heard it all before, endured his vitriol and abuse for far too long. "You know," he continued, his eyes glinting with malice, "we could have had it all. Everything we ever wanted, everything we deserved. But you just had to go and ruin it, didn't you?" I met his gaze, unflinching. I ruined it? I echoed, my voice low but laced with steel. Or did we ruin it together with our greed and selfishness? Kyle recoiled as if struck, his bravado faltering for the briefest of moments. But the mask quickly slipped back into place, his features twisting into a sneer of contempt. "Don't try to pin this on me, you pathetic excuse for a wife," he spat, his words laced with venom. "This is all on you, and you know it." I shook my head, a weary sigh escaping my lips. "Keep telling yourself that, Kyle, but we both know the truth. We did this to ourselves, and now we're paying the price." His fist slammed down on the table, rattling the cheap crockery and drawing the attention of the few other patrons. "Shut your mouth," he snarled, his eyes wild and unfocused. "Just shut your damn mouth before I—" But I never got to hear the rest of his threat. With a sudden, decisive motion, I drained the last of my coffee, set the mug down with a hollow clink, and rose to my feet. "Save it, Kyle," I said, my voice laced with a calm finality. "I'm done. Done with your threats, your abuse, your endless cycle of blame and recrimination." His mouth worked soundlessly, his bravado stripped away to reveal the pathetic, broken shell of a man beneath. "I'm starting over," I continued, straightening my shoulders and meeting his gaze head-on. "And this time, I'm doing it on my own terms, without you, without the poison of greed and selfishness that nearly destroyed me." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving Kyle to stew in his own bitter juices. The road ahead would be long and arduous, but for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt a glimmer of hope, a chance to atone for my mistakes, to rebuild from the ashes of my shattered dreams. And this time, I vowed, I would do it right.
I'm Caroline, and I was raised in what could be considered a typical household. Believe me when I say that the way things transpired was everything from typical. I was the second violin in my parents' orchestra from the day I was born. Tom, my older brother, was their favorite and their golden kid. They had high hopes for him, believing he would take over and grow our family's Chinese porcelain company. Me, I was only present. Tom received all of the latest technology, all of the attention, and all of the accolades. The most recent iPhone, it was Tom's. The most recent gaming system, Tom's awesome invitation to a party, Tom is leaving. Me. If I received a babysitter for the night or any of Tom's hand-me-downs, I was lucky. Don't misunderstand me. I didn't despise Tom or my parents. They were simply incomprehensible to me. They were constantly striving to be more important, wiser, or wealthy than they actually were. With them, looks were everything. At family get-togethers, Mom would hiss, "Caroline, get up straight. And for heaven's sake, be happy." What are people going to think? I would put on a false grin and wait for the opportunity to sneak away to my room. My mom's parents, my grandparents, were the sole bright light in all of this. It was like entering another planet when you visited them, since they resided in a comfortable, small house across town. I felt liked and seen with them. I felt like I could only be who I really was there. Tom had a great to-do when he graduated from high school. My parents proudly announced that Tom would be entering a prestigious institution they had handpicked for him, arranged a big party, and invited all of their key friends. Our boy is making great progress. Dad gave Tom a pat on the back and boasted, "The family will be proud of him." I stayed at home while Tom went to college. After several years, I looked into colleges and chose a curriculum that I was enthusiastic about. Telling my folks was all I needed to do. I plucked up the guts to approach them at breakfast the following day. I added, trembling slightly, "Mom, Dad, I've chosen the college I want to go to." They gave me the impression that I had sprouted a second head. "University?" Dad laughed. "You." Mom's high-pitched, false chuckle made my teeth tense. "Oh, Caroline, stop being so dumb. College is not necessary for you. We'll have you work in the shop." "But I'd like to learn." Dad interrupted me before I could finish. He firmly stated, "We're not wasting money on your education. Tom is using that money to buy a new car." I was stunned into stillness as I stood there. Then Mom struck the last blow. "Face it, Caroline," she murmured, smiling condescendingly but not rudely. "You're simply not cut out for college. In the store, you'll be considerably happier." It seemed as though someone had hit me in the stomach. To them, all of my efforts and goals were in vain. With tears running down my cheeks, I fled the room and called my grandparents, the only thing that came to me. I was crying so hard that I was having trouble speaking. "They said I'm not," Grandma remarked, "suitable for college." Into the phone, I wept. There was stillness for a while. Then Grandpa's harsh, irate voice could be heard on the line. "Caroline, pack your luggage. We are on our way to collect you." My parents barged into my room an hour later as I was packing clothing into a suitcase. "What are you doing, in your opinion?" Mom insisted. With a weak but resolute voice, I declared, "I'm leaving." Dad laughed. "Avoid being absurd. Where would you go?" The doorbell rang at that moment. I felt a sense of comfort as I heard Grandpa's loud voice below. "She's accompanying us," Grandpa remarked, coming into my doorway with Grandma at his heels. "Now give it a minute." Dad began, but Grandpa interrupted. "Caroline is 18. He snarled, "She can live anywhere she damn well pleases. And she enjoys living with us at the moment." I was already dragging my bag down the stairs when Mom made an attempt to dispute. I saw my childhood house vanish in the rearview mirror as we drove away. I expected to feel depressed, but instead I felt liberated. During a home-cooked meal that evening, my grandparents presented their strategy. Grandma reached for my hand and murmured, "We've been saving for years. Caroline, we always knew you were meant to be great. We would want to cover your education expenses." Suddenly, my life was altered. Ready to take on any challenge, I enrolled at the college of my dreams. Without fail, a little sum of money would show up in my account each month for lodging. "We believe in you" was usually written on the note. Late hours in the library, contentious class discussions, and projects that tested me in ways I had never experienced before were all examples of how passionately I put myself into my studies. I thoroughly enjoyed it. My professor once took me aside after I finished a particularly challenging project. Her normally severe expression broke into a rare grin as she continued, "Caroline, I'm impressed. How would you feel about working as a summer intern at Stellar Corp?" My mouth fell open. Stellar Corp. The city's most prominent business was Stellar Corp. Everyone wanted to work there. "Are you serious?" I stammered. She nodded. "I'm recommending you personally. Don't let me down." I practically floated out of the classroom. Me, Caroline, the girl who was not college material, landing an internship at Stellar Corp. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. The future was wide open, and I was ready to grab it with both hands. I was in my third year of college when the unexpected call came. My older brother Tom had already graduated and landed a job. He'd been bragging about some big promotion, and now my parents, who had hardly spoken to me in years, suddenly wanted me to come home to share in Tom's success. I spent the next few days debating whether to go. Part of me wanted to stay away to protect the life I built for myself, but another part wondered, maybe things had changed. Maybe they finally saw me differently. In the end, I decided to go. What's the worst that could happen, right? I arrived at my old house on Friday evening, feeling like a stranger as I walked up the familiar driveway. Mom answered the door, all smiles and air kisses. I just finished unpacking when I heard the front door open and Tom's voice drift up the stairs. "Mom, Dad, we're here." Curious, I headed downstairs. Tom was standing in the living room, his arm around a pretty blonde girl I'd never seen before. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet Sarah," Tom announced, beaming, my fiancée. Mom let out a squeal that could have shattered glass, while Dad pumped Tom's hand enthusiastically. I stood on the sidelines, feeling like an outsider at a party I hadn't been invited to. "It's nice to meet you," I said to Sarah, who smiled warmly at me. "You must be Caroline. Tom's told me so much about you." I doubted that, but I appreciated the effort. As we all sat down, the story came out. Tom and Sarah had been dating all through college, and now that they'd graduated, they decided to tie the knot. "So Sarah," Mom said, leaning forward eagerly, "tell us about your family. What do your parents do?" Sarah smiled. "Oh, they're in business. They own a chain of high-end boutiques across the country." I swear I could see dollar signs light up in my parents' eyes. Dad puffed up like a peacock. "Well, we're thrilled to welcome you to the family," he declared. "Now about the wedding. I think we should spare no expense. In fact, I'd be happy to cover half the cost myself." I nearly choked on my drink. Half the wedding costs. This from the man who wouldn't spend a dime on my college education. "That's very generous," Sarah said, looking a bit uncomfortable. "But really, there's no need." "Nonsense," Dad boomed. "We want this to be the event of the season. Nothing but the best for my son and his bride." I caught Tom's eye across the room. He looked embarrassed, uncomfortable. It was hard to tell. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. As the evening wore on, the wedding plans grew more and more extravagant. A 5-star venue, gourmet catering, designer dresses. My parents were going all out to impress Sarah's family. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of raised voices downstairs. Groaning, I dragged myself out of bed and crept down the stairs, curious about what new drama was unfolding. Tom and Sarah were standing in the living room, a sleek folder in Sarah's hands. My parents sat on the couch, looking confused. "What do you mean, another city?" Dad was saying, his face turning an alarming shade of red. Sarah opened the folder, revealing glossy photos of a stunning beach resort. "We've always dreamed of a destination wedding," she explained, her voice excited. "Look at this place. It's perfect." I watched as my father's eyes bulged at the price list Sarah handed him. This is ridiculous," he spluttered. "It's 3 times what we discussed." "But Dad," Tom argued, "you said you wanted the best." "This is the best." Dad stood up, his fists clenched. "I meant the best in our hometown, where our friends can attend. Who's going to travel across the country for your wedding?" "Our friends will," Sarah said softly, looking hurt. The argument escalated quickly. Dad insisted on a local wedding, while Tom and Sarah stood their ground on the destination plan. I stood in the corner, feeling like I was watching a tennis match, my head swaggling back and forth between the two sides. Finally, Dad exploded. "Enough. It's either a wedding here the way I want it, or you're on your own." The room fell silent. Tom's face hardened, a look I'd never seen before. "Fine," he said coldly. "We'll do it on our own." With that, he grabbed Sarah's hand and stormed out, slamming the door behind them. Dad collapsed onto the couch, his face in his hands. Mom fluttered around him, murmuring soothing words. I stood there awkwardly, not sure what to do. "I'm going to head back to college," I said quietly. Neither of them responded. I packed my bags and left, grateful to escape the tension-filled house. Back at college, I threw myself into my studies, trying to forget the family drama. Weeks turned into months, and life went on. I was deep into my final project when I got the call that changed everything. "Is this Caroline Thompson?" a formal voice asked. "Yes, that's me." I replied, my heart racing. "This is Mr. Johnson from Johnson Associates Law Firm. I'm afraid I have some bad news. Your grandparents, Robert and Margaret Thompson, were in a car accident 3 days ago. I'm sorry to inform you that they didn't survive." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. My grandparents gone, it couldn't be true. They were the only ones who had ever truly believed in me, supported me. "Now, Miss Thompson," the lawyer's voice brought me back to reality. "There's something else we need to discuss. Your grandparents' will." I listened in a daze as Mr. Johnson explained that I was the sole beneficiary. My grandparents had left me everything. Their cozy house, their savings, everything. I sat on my bed after the call ended, trying to process it all. Grief for my grandparents wed with disbelief over my inheritance. I was now the owner of a house and had a substantial amount of money in the bank. The dust had barely settled on my grandparents' funeral when the vultures started circling. I was still trying to process my grief when Tom showed up at my door, all smiles and fraternal love. "Caroline, sis," he exclaimed, pulling me into a hug that felt about as genuine as a $3 bill. "How you holding up?" I stepped back, eyeing him wearily. "I'm managing. What are you doing here?" Tom sauntered into my apartment like he owned the place, making himself comfortable on my couch. "Well, I heard about Grandma and Grandpa's will. That's quite a windfall you got there, huh?" And there it was. I crossed my arms, already knowing where this was heading. "Look, Caroline," Tom said, his voice taking on that wheeling tone I knew all too well. "Sarah and I are still trying to put together our dream wedding. And now that you've come into some money." I cut him off. "No, Tom, I'm not paying for your wedding." His face fell, then hardened. "Come on, Caroline, don't be selfish. It's not like you earned that money. We all know you were just sucking up to them to get their money." The accusation hit me like a slap in the face. "How dare you?" I hissed. I loved them. They were the only ones who ever believed in me. "Yeah, because you played them like a fiddle." Tom was on his feet now, shouting, "Poor little Caroline, so neglected. Give me a break. At least I'm not a spoiled brat who thinks the world owes him a fancy wedding." I shot back, and we went back and forth, hurling accusations and old Greco-Romanenses at each other. Years of resentment and hurt came pouring out. By the time Tom stormed out, slamming the door behind him, I was shaking with anger and hurt. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. A few days later, my phone exploded with messages from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. Apparently, my parents had been busy. "How could you be so selfish, Caroline? Your poor brother just wants a nice wedding. I always knew you were trouble." The messages went on and on. I called my parents, demanding an explanation. "Well, what did you expect?" Mom sniffed. "Refusing to help your own brother. It's shameful. You didn't want to pay for his ridiculous wedding either." I reminded her, "That's different." Dad chimed in, "We're his parents. You're just being greedy with your inheritance." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Greedy? I worked my ass off in college while you two showered Tom with everything he wanted. "Watch your language, young lady," Mom scolded. This is exactly why we always preferred Tom. He knows how to behave in polite society. Over the next few weeks, the family divide grew wider. Invitations to family events stopped coming. My cousins unfriended me on social media. It was like I'd been erased from the family tree overnight. At first, it hurt a lot, but as the days went by, I started to feel relieved. No more pretending. No more walking on eggshells. No more feeling like the family disappointment. I threw myself into my studies with renewed vigor. I had 1 semester left, and I was determined to graduate with honors. My grandparents had believed in me and had given me this amazing gift. I wasn't about to let them down. The day I graduated from college should have been one of the happiest of my life. Instead, I felt empty. There was no one in the audience cheering for me, no proud parents taking photos, no celebratory dinner afterwards. I collected my diploma and went home alone. The next few weeks were a blur of job applications and interviews. I was determined to make something of myself, to prove to everyone, especially myself, that I was worth something. Then out of the blue, my phone buzzed with a message from Tom. I nearly dropped it in shock. "Hey Caroline, I know we haven't talked in a while, but I'm getting married next month. It would mean a lot if you could come. Call me." I stared at the message for a long time before finally hitting the call button. "Caroline." Tom's voice was hesitant. "Thanks for calling. Look, I messed up. I've been thinking a lot about how I treated you, how we all treated you. I was a spoiled brat, and I'm sorry." I was stunned into silence. "You're my sister, Caroline," he continued. "You and our whole family. You're important to me. I want everyone there for my big day. Please say you'll come." I felt a lump in my throat. I'll think about it," I managed to say before hanging up. The day of the wedding arrived, and I found myself standing outside an elegant hotel, clutching an expensive gift, and feeling like I was about to walk into the lion's den. The venue was stunning, flowers everywhere, crystal chandeliers, a string quartet playing softly in the corner. For a moment, I felt underdressed in my simple cocktail dress. I spotted Tom across the room, looking dashing in his tuxedo. Taking a deep breath, I made my way over to him. "Congratulations," I said, forcing a smile. Tom's face lit up. "Caroline, you came." He pulled me into a hug, and for a moment, I let myself believe that everything might be okay. We chatted for a few minutes, and I started to relax. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad after all. Then I saw them. Mom and Dad making their grand entrance. Mom was dripping in jewelry. Dad in a tux that looked like it cost more than my monthly rent. They swept into the room like royalty, greeting guests with air kisses and condescending smiles. "Oh, darling, my son's wedding is just divine," I overheard Mom saying to another guest. Of course, we spared no expense. Only the best for our Tom. I had to stifle a laugh. Same old Mom and Dad, always putting on a show. As the evening wore on, I did my best to avoid them, sticking to the edges of the room and making small talk with distant relatives who didn't seem to remember our falling out. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, the way Mom kept glancing at me, the hushed conversations that stopped when I walked by. It was like waiting for the other shoe to drop. The evening was in full swing when Dad clinked his glass, calling for everyone's attention. "It's time for the family toast," he announced, beaming with pride. My stomach dropped. I hadn't prepared anything, but before I could protest, Mom was dragging me toward the stage. I stumbled after my parents, feeling like a lamb being led to slaughter. Dad started the speech, his voice thick with emotion. "Tom, Sarah, we couldn't be prouder. Your love is an inspiration to us." Mom chimed in, "We've always been a close-knit family, supporting each other through thick and thin." I stood there, trying to keep a neutral expression, wondering what alternate reality they were living in. Then Dad dropped the bomb. "In fact, we love Tom so much that we took out a substantial loan to pay for this beautiful wedding." Wait, what? I thought they'd refused to pay for the destination wedding, but Dad wasn't finished. "Of course we won't be paying back that loan ourselves. No, our wonderful daughter Caroline has generously offered to cover it." I stammered. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I felt all the blood drain from my face as every eye in the room turned to me. What? I stammered, my voice echoing through the microphone. There must be some mistake. I never agreed to that. Mom's hand clamped down on my arm, her fingernails digging into my skin. Smile and agree, dear, she hissed through clenched teeth. But I was done playing along. I wrenched my arm free and stepped up to the microphone. I'm sorry, but this is the first time hearing about any loan. I never agreed to pay for Tom's wedding. The room erupted into shocked whispers. I saw Tom and Sarah exchanging panicked glances. Caroline, darling, Mom said, her voice sickly sweet as she tried to salvage the situation. Don't be modest. We all know how generous you are with your inheritance. That was the last straw. Generous? You mean the inheritance you all tried to guilt me out of. The one you said I didn't deserve. Dad tried to grab the microphone, but I held on tight. I'm sorry, but I won't be paying for this wedding. I wasn't even consulted about it. You ungrateful little bastard. Dad snarled, forgetting the microphone was still on. His words echoed through the ballroom, causing several guests to gasp. Mom's carefully cultivated mask of politeness crumbled. We should have thrown you out on the street years ago. You're worthless. You hear me? Worthless. I stood there, shock and hurt warring inside me. Then a calm settled over me. Without another word, I handed the microphone to the wide-eyed DJ and walked off the stage. As I made my way through the stunned crowd, I heard my parents' voices behind me, alternating between apologies to the guests and more insults hurled at my back. I made it to my car before the tears started. As I drove home, my phone exploded with messages, some supportive, most accusatory. I blocked them all. At home, I double-locked the door and sank to the floor, my mind reeling. Had this all been a setup? Had Tom's apology just been a ploy to get me to pay for his wedding? I felt sick, betrayed, angry. But underneath it all, there was a small spark of relief. The mask had finally come off. There was no more pretending, no more hoping for a family that clearly didn't want me. I woke up the next morning feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. My eyes were puffy from crying, and my head pounded with the mother of all headaches. I was contemplating spending the entire day in bed when there was a knock at the door. Peering through the peephole, I was shocked to see Tom standing there, looking as rough as I felt. "Caroline, please," he called through the door. "I've been trying to reach you all night. Can we talk?" Part of me wanted to tell him to go to hell, but curiosity won out. I opened the door a crack, eyeing him warily. "What do you want, Tom?" He held up his hands in surrender. To apologize and explain. "Please, can I come in?" Against my better judgment, I let him in. We sat at my small kitchen table, 2 cups of coffee between us like a peace offering. I swear to you, Caroline, I had no idea about Mom and Dad's plan. Tom began, his voice thick with emotion. When you stormed out, I confronted them. It was ugly. I snorted. "Yeah, I bet." "No, you don't understand," Tom insisted. "Sarah and I, we never asked them for money. We were paying for the wedding ourselves. This whole loan thing was all their idea. They wanted to look good in front of Sarah's family." I felt a weight lift off my chest. "So you didn't set me up?" "God, no, Caroline. I meant what I said before the wedding. I want to make things right between us." As Tom talked, I saw a side of him I'd never seen before. He told me how Sarah had opened his eyes to how dysfunctional our family was, how her parents treated their children with love and respect, not as pawns in some social climbing game. "Sarah's parents are loaded," Tom said with a wry smile, "but you'd never know it. They're the most down-to-earth people I've ever met. When they heard what happened, they offered to pay off Mom and Dad's loan." What? No, they are unable to accomplish it. I objected. Tom extended his hand. Don't be concerned. I'm going to reimburse them in full. However, they wanted to do this for us, to give us a fresh start free from the drama of our parents. Tears began to form in my eyes, but they weren't tears of annoyance or rage for once. Now what? I inquired. Tom grabbed my hand from across the table. We now begin over as a true family. Caroline, Sarah, and I want you in our life without any conditions. For what seemed like the first time in our lives, we really chatted for hours on end. I thought I had my brother back by the time Tom departed. The months that followed flew by. I threw myself into my work with a zeal I never realized I possessed after landing a position at a marketing business. Tom and Sarah became frequent visitors to my home for movie evenings or dinners. Tom and Sarah arrived at my door with identical smiles one bright afternoon. We have some news. I'm practically bouncing with excitement, Sarah added. You will become an aunt. With a shriek, I gathered them both into an embrace. I couldn't help but be amazed at how much had changed as we celebrated. When our parents learned about the baby, they attempted to re-enter our life, but Tom and I refused to back down. We had had enough of their theatrics and trickery. Although separating from them wasn't easy, we now have each other, and sometimes the family you select is more resilient than the one you were born into. My name is Sandra, and I was raised in a large household. They repeatedly tried since Dad was determined to have a son. Before the physicians eventually took action, Mom became pregnant repeatedly. No more of the group said, "It's too risky." At that point, Mom and Dad decided to give up on their boy-loving ideal. I had to do a lot of grunt labor because I was the eldest. Please understand that although I adored my sisters, there were moments when I felt more like a parent than a sibling. I have to mature quickly, you know. I was washing laundry, changing diapers, and assisting Mom with all household chores while the other children were playing outside. With the birth of my younger sister, everything drastically altered. It seemed as though Mom and Dad had just realized they were parents. They purchased her the nicest toys, lavished her with attention, and enrolled her in every club and activity imaginable. She got what she desired. When I was around 14, I once heard my mother on the phone. "I just don't have time for the older girls anymore," she stated. However, Sandra is managing it. She is an excellent assistant. Assisting. I was relegated to the status of an assistant, not a sister or even a daughter. My grandma, Mom's mother, was my secret, though, and it kept me going. I was able to get her phone number, and we had been communicating covertly since they had a major argument years ago. I began to fantasize of college as I grew older. Being the babysitter for the family wasn't all I wanted for myself. However, my parents gave me a shocking revelation when I graduated from high school. Dad remarked, "There's no money for your education, Sandra," without even meeting my gaze. "You must get employment and provide financial support. We must put money aside for your sister's schooling." I sobbed myself to sleep that night because I felt helpless and stuck. But then I thought of Grandma, my hidden weapon. I contacted her the following day, and in between sobbing, told her everything. She added, "Don't you worry, sweetheart," in a stern and strong voice. "I'll cover your college expenses. You want to have the opportunity to live a better life." Suddenly, I found myself in a whole other universe. In search of a new beginning, I sent applications to universities in various cities. I was ecstatic to be admitted to study economics. My parents, however, didn't think so. "You're leaving your family behind," Mom said, her eyes icy. "After everything we've done for you. Done for me. What I was hearing was unbelievable. "I've been raising your kids since I was a kid myself." Dad shouted, "Get out," in a quiet, angry voice. "Go if you intend to. However, don't count on our assistance." That evening, while my sisters watched with teary eyes, I packed my luggage. They begged, "Don't go, Kathy." I told them, "I have to," and gave them all a firm embrace. "But I'll be here for you no matter what. Always." "Girls, you are not to have any contact with Sandra," Dad said behind me as I left the house. Do you get it? I felt like I could finally breathe as I got used to college life. There was a lot of activity on campus, and for once, I just had to worry about myself. However, while accepting this new chapter, I was still plagued with guilt. I really missed my sisters. I couldn't handle the idea of severing all contact with my parents, even if they were banned. I received a call one evening from an unidentified number. As I responded, my heart pounded. My second youngest sister said, "Kathy," in a voice that was almost audible. "Emily, is that you?" I was so excited that I could barely control myself. "Yes, it's me. My friend's phone is being used by me. Dad and Mom can't find out." We caught up on everything over the course of many hours that evening. Emily told me how our parents had become stricter, how things had changed at home, and how much everyone, even Sarah, missed me. In reference to our younger sister, I inquired. The person on the other end paused. "Sarah?" "Kathy, she's different," she informed me. "Mom and Dad learned that we had called you. They confiscated our phones. But don't worry, we'll figure out how to stay in contact. We cherish you, Kathy." Those covert calls ended up becoming my lifeline. With the exception of Sarah, my sisters would contact me via the phones of their pals. We would discuss their goals and lifestyles, and I would tell them about my time in college. It was something, but it wasn't the same as being there. I put myself into my studies in the interim. I was really interested in economics, and I was doing quite well in my lessons. My professors took notice, and soon I was being recommended for internships and special projects. As my college years flew by, I couldn't help but think about my family back home. I'd hear snippets from my sisters about how Sarah was still the golden child, how she was in all these clubs, and always the center of attention. Mom and Dad are talking about sending her to some fancy private school. My sister Jessica told me during one of our secret calls. "What about you and Emily?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Oh, Jessica said, trying to sound nonchalant. "We'll probably just go to the local high school. It's fine, really." But I knew it wasn't fine. I knew how it felt to be overlooked, to be treated like you didn't matter as much. It broke my heart that my sisters were going through the same thing. As graduation approached, I felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. I'd done well in college, thanks in no small part to my grandmother's support. She'd been my rock through it all, always there with a kind word or a bit of advice when I needed it. "I'm so proud of you, Sandra," she told me over the phone one night. "You've overcome so much. Your grandfather would have been proud too." On the day of my graduation, I scanned the crowd, hoping against hope that maybe, just maybe, my parents and sisters would be there. But they weren't. The only familiar face in the sea of people was my grandmother, beaming with pride. Fresh out of college, I hit the ground running. The job was challenging, but I thrived on it. Months flew by, and I settled into a routine. Work, gym, home, repeat. It wasn't exciting, but it was mine. I was building my own life on my own terms. Then came the company's annual corporate party. I almost didn't go. Large gatherings still made me a bit uncomfortable, but my colleague Jen insisted. "Come on, Sandra," she pleaded. "It'll be fun. Plus, I heard some bigwigs from our partner companies will be there. a great networking opportunity. The party was in full swing when I arrived. Soft jazz played in the background as people mingled, drinks in hand. I was about to make a beeline for the punch bowl when I quite literally bumped into someone. "Oh, I'm so sorry," I stammered, looking up to see a pair of kind brown eyes. "No harm done," the man said with a warm smile. "I'm Michael, by the way. I don't think we've met." "Sandra," I replied, shaking his hand. "I'm from the economics department." We got to talking, and I learned that Michael was an executive from one of our partner companies. He was smart, funny, and easy to talk to. Before I knew it, hours had passed. As the party wound down, Michael asked for my number. "I'd love to continue this conversation over coffee sometime," he said. I hesitated for a moment, then thought, why not? I'd spent so much of my life taking care of others. Maybe it was time to let someone take care of me for a change. Our first date turned into a second, then a third. Before I knew it, we were officially a couple. Michael was everything I'd never known I wanted, kind, supportive, and he actually listened when I talked. A year later, he proposed to me. As we started planning the wedding, I faced a dilemma. Should I invite my family? Despite everything, they were still my parents, my sisters. After much thought, I sent the invitations to my parents, to all my sisters, even Sarah. I also sent one to my grandmother, the one person who had always been there for me. Weeks passed, and I heard nothing from my parents or sisters. Then one day, I got a call from Emily Cathy. She said, her voice trembling, "We got your invitation. Mom and Dad, they won't let us come. They won't even let us send you a card. I'm so sorry." The day of the wedding arrived. As I stood in front of the mirror in my white dress, I felt a mix of joy and sadness. My grandmother walked in, her eyes shining with tears. "Oh, Sandra," she said, hugging me tight. "You look beautiful. I'm so proud of you." As I walked down the aisle towards Michael, I saw the faces of our friends, his family, and my grandmother. My family wasn't there, but I realized something important. Family isn't always about blood. It's about love, support, and acceptance. The years after our wedding flew by in a whirlwind of love, laughter, and shared dreams. Michael and I settled into our life together, both of us continuing to work and build our careers. We traveled, explored new hobbies together, and talked endlessly about our future. Then we decided to start trying for a baby. Months passed, then a year, then two. Nothing happened. We went through all the tests, tried every recommendation, but still no baby. It was heartbreaking. The next few years were a roller coaster of hope and disappointment. We went through treatment after treatment, each failure hitting us harder than the last. One day, after another failed round of IVF, I broke down. "Maybe we're not meant to be parents," I sobbed into Michael's chest. He held me tight, stroking my hair. "Hey, look at me," he said gently. "We're going to be parents. Maybe not in the way we originally thought, but we will be. What do you think about adoption? A child is a child, Sandra. All they need is love, and we've got plenty of that." His words warmed my heart, and I felt a glimmer of hope. "Okay," I said, wiping my tears. "Let's do it." The adoption process was long and often frustrating. There were so many forms to fill out, interviews to go through, and home studies to pass. But we persevered, driven by our desire to give a child a loving home. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we got the call. The day we met Lily was one I'll never forget. She was tiny, with big brown eyes and skin darker than ours. She looked scared and confused, clinging to her social worker's hand. I knelt down to her level. "Hi, Lily," I said softly. "I'm Sandra, and this is Michael. We've been waiting a long time to meet you." She looked at us wearily, then back at her social worker, who nodded encouragingly. Slowly, Lily reached out and took my hand. At that moment, I fell in love. This was our daughter. I didn't care that she didn't look like us or share our DNA. She was ours, and we were hers. When Lily was about 5, we sat her down and explained in simple terms how she came to be our daughter. We showed her pictures from the day we met her and told her how much we'd wanted her, how we'd fallen in love with her the moment we saw her. Lily listened intently, her brow furrowed in concentration. When we finished, she was quiet for a moment. "So you picked me?" she asked finally. I smiled, tears in my eyes. "Yes, sweetheart. Out of all the children in the world, we picked you, and we'd pick you again every single time." She beamed at us, then threw her arms around us both. "I love you, Mommy and Daddy," she said. As I held my daughter close, I thought about my own childhood. The pain, the neglect, the feeling of never being good enough. I vowed then and there that Lily would never feel that way. She would always know how loved and wanted she was. Life has a funny way of bringing you full circle. One day, Michael said his company had opened a branch in my hometown, and he would become the head of this branch. The move was chaotic, as moves tend to be, but as we settled into our new home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to reach out to my sisters. My parents had passed away a few years back. I hadn't gone to the funeral, but my sisters, maybe it was time to mend those fences. I reached out to Jessica and Emily first. They were cautious at first, but eager to reconnect. We met for coffee, and it was like no time had passed at all. They shared pictures of Lily and told me about their own families, their kids. "We've missed you so much, Kathy," Emily said, squeezing my hand. "We're so glad you're back." For a while, everything was perfect. We started having family gatherings and holiday celebrations. Lily was thrilled to have cousins to play with, and I loved seeing her surrounded by family. But then there was Sarah, our youngest sister. From the moment we reconnected, I could tell she hadn't changed much. She was still the spoiled, entitled girl she'd always been, now grown into a woman who thought the world revolved around her and her family. At our first big family gathering, Sarah showed up with her husband and their son, Tommy. From the moment they arrived, it was clear that Sarah saw this as a competition rather than a reunion. "Tommy, show your aunties how well you can sing," she'd say, pushing her son forward. "He's taking lessons, you know. The teacher says he's a prodigy." As the party went on, I noticed Lily hanging back, looking uncomfortable. She approached Tommy, holding out a piece of candy. "Want to share?" she asked shyly. Before Tommy could respond, Sarah swooped in. "Tommy, don't take that," she screeched. "Throw it away. Her hands are dirty." I was across the room in an instant. "Sarah, what are you talking about? Lily's hands are clean." But Sarah just glared at me, then at Lily. "Well, you never know with her kind," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Come on, Tommy, let's go play with your real cousins." I stood there shocked and hurt. Did she really just say that about my daughter? From that moment on, things were tense. Sarah made it clear at every gathering that she didn't consider Lily part of the family. She loudly proclaimed that Tommy couldn't play with Lily because who knows what diseases she might have, or we don't know her genetic background. Each time, I'd confront her, defend my daughter, but the damage was being done. I could see Lily withdrawing, becoming quieter at these family events. One day, I made a decision. I wouldn't force Lily to attend these gatherings anymore. I started declining invitations, making excuses. Jessica and Emily understood, even though they were disappointed. As the dust settled from our move and the family drama that ensued, I found solace in my visits to Grandma. She had been my rock through everything, and now in her twilight years, I wanted to be there for her as much as she had been for me. Every weekend, Lily and I would make the short drive to Grandma's house. She would be waiting on the porch, her face lighting up as soon as she saw us. "There's my girl," she'd call out, arms outstretched. Lily would race up the steps, throwing herself into Grandma's embrace. "Grandma, I missed you." Watching them together always warmed my heart. Grandma doted on Lily, showering her with love and attention. She never once treated Lily differently because she was adopted. To Grandma, Lily was family, plain and simple. As the months passed, Grandma's health began to decline. Our visits became less about long talks and more about quiet companionship. Lily would read to her or show her drawings she made. Even in her weakened state, Grandma's love for us showed through. The day Grandma passed was one of the hardest of my life. We'd been there with her at the end, holding her hand as she slipped away peacefully. Lily, wise beyond her years, had climbed onto the bed and curled up next to her great-grandmother. "It's okay, Grandma," she'd whispered. "You can rest now. We love you." In the days that followed, as we dealt with our grief and the logistics that come with losing a loved one, we received some unexpected news. Grandma's lawyer called, asking us to come to his office. "Your grandmother left a will," he explained. When we arrived, "Well, you might want to sit down for this," he said. What he told us next left me speechless. Grandma had left everything to me and Lily. The house, several cars, and over $1 million. "Your grandfather was quite successful," the lawyer explained, "and your grandmother was an astute investor. She had intended to leave it all to your mother despite their estrangement. But when your mother passed," I nodded, understanding. Grandma had changed her will, leaving everything to us. When word got out about the inheritance, my phone started ringing off the hook. Jessica and Emily called to congratulate me, saying I deserved it. But then came the call I'd been dreading. "Sarah," Sandra said, her voice sickly sweet. "I heard about Grandma's will. So when are you sharing the inheritance with the rest of us?" I felt a flash of anger. After everything she'd said and done, how dare she? "I'm not," I said firmly. "The inheritance is for me and Lily. That's what Grandma wanted." "But that's not fair," Sarah screeched. "I'm family too. I deserve." I cut her off. "No, Sarah, you don't. Goodbye," and I hung up. As I put down the phone, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For so long, I tried to please everyone, to be the perfect daughter and sister. But now I realized it was time to put my own family first. It was Jessica's birthday, and despite my reservations, I decided it was time to make an appearance at a family gathering. When we arrived, the party was in full swing. Jessica's backyard was filled with laughter and chatter. Kids ran around playing tag while adults mingled, drinks in hand. For a moment, it felt like old times. Jessica embraced me warmly. "I'm so glad you came, Kathy," she whispered. I could see the genuine happiness in her eyes. For the first hour or so, everything was fine. Lily joined her cousins on the lawn, their laughter floating across the yard. I relaxed a bit, thinking maybe this wasn't such a bad idea after all. But then I saw Sarah. She was moving from child to child, whispering in their ears. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but I saw the way the kids' eyes widened, the way they glanced at Lily. Suddenly, Lily was standing alone. The other children had moved away, forming their own group, pointedly excluding her. I watched as my daughter's face crumpled in confusion and hurt. Before I could react, Lily ran to me, tears streaming down her face. "Mommy," she sobbed, "they don't want to play with me anymore. They said I'm sick and not really family." Rage boiled up inside me. I hugged Lily close and then marched over to Sarah, who was watching the scene with a smug smile. What the hell do you think you're doing?" I demanded, my voice low and dangerous. Sarah's smile didn't falter. "Oh, calm down, Sandra. I'm just telling the children the truth. They deserve to know about her condition." "Condition?" I spat. "The only person with a condition here is you, Sarah. Your behavior is disgusting." By now, we'd drawn a crowd. The other adults were watching, wide-eyed, as the confrontation unfolded. Sarah's face twisted into an ugly smear. "My behavior? That's rich coming from you, Sandra. You who shamelessly took Grandma's money, robbing the rest of us of our rightful inheritance. And for what? To give money to that girl who isn't even really part of this family." Gasps echoed around us. "How dare you?" I seethed. "Lily is my daughter. She is as much a part of this family as anyone else." Sarah laughed, a cruel, mocking sound. "Family? She's not even related to us. She's just some random kid you picked up, probably born to drug addicts or criminals. She has no right to our family's legacy." I was shaking with fury now. "You don't know anything about Lily or her birth parents, and it doesn't matter. She is my daughter, and I love her more than anything in this world." "Love?" Sarah sneered. "Is that what you call it when you use a child to steal from your own family? Face it, Sandra, you're nothing but a thief using that girl to get Grandma's money. Well, we won't stand for it anymore. It's time you shared what rightfully belongs to all of us." I was about to respond when Jessica stepped forward, her face set in determination. "That's enough, Sarah," she said firmly. "You have no right to speak to Sandra like that or to treat Lily this way." Sarah's eyes widened in shock. "What? You're taking her side?" Emily joined Jessica, standing beside me. "We both are. Sandra has always been there for us, even when our own parents weren't. She raised us, Sarah. She deserves every penny of that inheritance." I felt a lump form in my throat, touched by my sister's support. Sarah's face contorted with rage. "You traitors! How dare you? You're betraying the memory of our parents." Emily scoffed. "Our parents? The same parents who neglected us and showered you with attention. The same parents who cut Sandra off for daring to want an education." Jessica gave a nod. "Not to mention how you stole Mom and Dad's home and all of their money when they passed away, Sarah. You didn't give any of us a dime of it." This revelation was fresh to me, and I gasped. "What? Sarah, is that accurate?" Sarah's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water as her face became pale. "It's true," said Emily. "She got everything when Mom and Dad passed, and she never once offered to share." I felt a surge of fury and disillusionment. Sarah had been accusing me of stealing all along, even though she had done the exact same thing herself. "Sarah," I stated firmly and steadily, "I believe it's time for you to go." She said, "You can't make me." But Jessica interrupted. "She can indeed. I want you to go. This is my house. We're all sick of your outbursts and your meanness. You're not welcome here until you can show respect for Sandra and Lily." Sarah realized she was outnumbered as she glanced around. She took her son's hand and walked off after giving him one more scowl. I felt a burden leave my shoulders as the gate slammed behind her. With tears in my eyes, I turned to face my sisters. "Thank you," I said in a whisper. I decided later that evening. I informed my sisters of my idea over the phone the next day. They protested that I didn't have to, but I persisted. I kept the $1 million for our family and gave them the house and the cars. I experienced a wave of calm when the inheritance was resolved. I made sure Lily will always be taken care of by transferring half of the money to a trust fund for her future. Michael and I made the decision to use the other half for our family. We would go to Disney World, which Lily had been fantasizing about. We would remodel our house to make it the ideal setting for our small family. Additionally, we would consider adopting a second kid to give Lily the sibling she has always desired. Like Dad, I can still picture the paint flaking off as I sat on our old, creaky porch steps, eager to get out. He had wheels beneath his feet and a heart too huge for any map, according to Mom. When the police arrived that day and reported that Dad's truck had been discovered, abandoned on the side of some forgotten roadway, I finally understood what that meant. At the age of 7, I clung to my mother's skirt, feeling the weight of her silent tears, even though I didn't fully comprehend them. But Jane Mom was a warrior. She worked extra shifts at the neighborhood cafe without Dad. She would frequently arrive home late, attempting to be quiet but never quite succeeding, and I would often fall asleep to the sound. When I was around 12 years old, I asked her one evening, "Mom, why do you work so much? Are you not worn out?" Her eyes were sweet yet exhausted as she sat next to me. "We need to make ends meet, Ella. We're tougher than life, aren't we?" I nodded, happy to be strong like Mom, even if I didn't really understand. When I was 18, Mom was diagnosed with cancer, which was a devastating blow. She put up a fierce fight, but it was like using a spoon to stop the flood. She died gently, leaving me with a pile of debts and a few memories. My desire, my escape, was to be college. For the first year, I was able to make ends meet, but after that, I was on my own. I balanced 2 or even 3 jobs with my classes, anything that paid. I recall crying on one really trying night at the university library. Surrounded by volumes that seemed as heavy as the world on my shoulders, I was by myself. I met John at that time. His eyes were worried as he approached. "Hey, are you okay?" I was ashamed and wiped my eyes. "Yeah, just college stuff." A bit hesitantly, he grinned. "I understand. By the way, my name is John." "Ella," I said, forcing a little grin. That was the beginning with John. He was different, kind and dependable, like a rock in my choppy sea. He didn't have much, but he gave me all he had, including his old, worn laptop, notes from classes, and a half sandwich. Sometimes we would sit together and converse, and other times we would simply sit in quiet. It was secure and cozy. Since Mom was here, I hadn't had that emotion. "You're the strongest person I know, Ella," John once said. "I have no doubt that you will succeed." I gave a little sour laugh. "Powerful. I feel as though I'm barely surviving." "That's what being strong is about, isn't it?" he said, hanging on even when it's the last thing you want to do. I gave him a serious look and saw that he was correct. With or without wheels under my feet, I knew I would survive because I was strong, just like Mom. Those elegant brochures were not representative of college life. It was challenging, rough, and put you to the test in ways you never would have imagined. My stomach was in knots as I waited in line at the financial aid office during my sophomore year. I was treated like a number by the woman behind the counter. Next, she yelled without raising her gaze. I started to say, "Hey, I'm here about my scholarship renewal," when she interrupted. "There is nothing I can do if it isn't refreshed in the system." Next. Feeling a mixture of powerlessness and rage, I left. I ran across John once more at that point. He would constantly show up when I least expected him to. His brows were wrinkled in worry as he said, "Hey, Ella, everything okay?" I gave a head shake. "No, not at all. A dead end is financial aid. It appears like I may have to leave school." John was silent for a while. That's difficult, but keep going. You're more intelligent than half of these academics. Despite the darkness, I laughed. I'm grateful, John. I simply am not sure what to do. Let's get coffee, please. My reward. You may fill me in on everything. That cup of coffee became many more. At college, John became my go-to person. He had a knack for making issues appear more manageable and smaller. I would try not to get overwhelmed by my own concerns when we sat in the cafeteria, him with his boundless optimism. You know, Ella, you should start looking for a job on campus, he suggested one day. Perhaps it will assist with the financial condition. I gave an eye roll. You don't believe I've tried. Everyone seems to be trying to harm me or something. John leaned closer. Not all of them. I've heard that the library is trying to find someone. You might as well be compensated for being there all the time. I considered it. Maybe, but what if they say no? After that, we discover something else. Ella, you're not alone in this. That's how I ended up working at the library. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid some bills. Between stacking books and serving coffees at a local cafe, I barely had time for studies, but I was making it work one day at a time. John and I grew closer. He wasn't just the guy who bought me coffee anymore. He was my friend, my confidant. He knew about my mom, my dad, and all the messy bits in between. It was one evening, while closing up the library, that John said something that stuck with me. Ella, you're going to make something of yourself. I just know it. And I'll be here cheering you on. I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me. Thanks, John. That means a lot. College was tough, but with John by my side, it felt like I had a fighting chance. He was more than a friend. He was a reminder that some good still existed in this crazy, mixed-up world. After college, life took a turn I didn't expect. John and I got married. It wasn't some big fairy tale wedding, just a small courthouse due with a few friends and little fanfare. We moved into this tiny apartment that had more cracks than walls, but it was ours. It felt like a fresh start, a new chapter. Then came the problem. John's mom, Mrs. Smith. The woman was a piece of work. The first time she visited our place, her nose wrinkled like she'd walked into a dumpster. "This is where you live," she said, her voice dripping with something that was half disbelief, half disgust. I tried to smile. "Yeah, it's not much, but we're happy." She snorted. "Happy? John, you can do better than this. And what about kids? You can't raise kids in this." "This?" John cut in, trying to ease the tension. "Mom, we've talked about this. We're not rushing into kids. We're focusing on our careers right now." But she wouldn't have it. Every visit was a new complaint. The apartment's too small. The neighborhood's not good enough. Why isn't Ella cooking more? It went on and on, one evening after she left. I turned to John, frustration boiling over. "Doesn't it bother you the way your mom talks about our life?" John, ever the peacemaker, shrugged. "She's just worried about us. That's how she shows love, I guess." "That's not love, John. That's criticism." "There's a difference." He didn't say much after that. It was like he couldn't see what was so clear to me. His mom's words were chipping away at us bit by bit. Things got worse when she started hinting we should move somewhere better. I lost it one day. "John, we can't afford some fancy place." "Why doesn't she get that?" John looked uncomfortable. "She just wants the best for us, Ella. Maybe we could look at some other apartments, just to keep her quiet." "Keep her quiet, John? When are you going to stand up to her?" "We're married. This is our life, not hers." He didn't have an answer. That silence said more than any words could. So we kept living our life in our tiny apartment with Mrs. Smith's disapproval, hanging over us like a bad smell. I loved John, but his inability to stand up to his mom was driving a wedge between us. It was like he was still her little boy, not a grown man, married and making his own way in the world. As time marched on, so did our lives, but in different directions. I landed a job at a marketing firm. It was demanding as hell, but I loved it. I was climbing the ladder, making something of myself. John, on the other hand, was stuck in the same old job, a manager at a local retail store. He seemed okay with it, but I couldn't understand why he didn't want more. One night, I came home late, exhausted but buzzing from a successful project. John was on the couch, glued to some TV show. I flopped down beside him. You won't believe the day I had. We landed the big account. John grunted. That's great, Ella. I frowned, looking for some enthusiasm. Aren't you happy for me? He turned a bit annoyed. Of course I am. It's all you ever talk about. Work, work, work. I sat up, stung. Well, sorry for being passionate about my career. What do you want me to do? Be like you, satisfied with just getting by. He shot up. What's that supposed to mean? It means, why don't you want more, John? Why are you content just being this? He didn't answer, just stormed off to bed. I stayed on the couch, fuming and hurt. The tension spilled over into everything. Even simple conversations turned into minefields. Then came the day when John dropped a bombshell. He wanted us to move to a bigger place, something more befitting our status. I stared at him like he'd grown a second head. Befitting our status? John, we can't afford a fancy place. We're doing fine here. He was insistent. But we can't live like this forever, Ella, and my mom keeps saying. I cut him off. Oh, so it's your mom again. When are you going to stop listening to her and start living for us? John's face turned red. I'm thinking about our future, Ella. Maybe you should too. That hurt. It felt like he didn't see all the hard work I was putting into building that future. It was like we were on different planets. In the end, we did move to a house that cost us a whopping $12,000 a month. I could afford it, but it was a stretch. John seemed happier, but every time I wrote that rent check, I felt a part of me scream in protest. We were living in a house that was too big, with a gap between us that was growing wider. I lay awake most nights, wondering how we got here. Was it the money, the jobs, or had we just changed too much? Just when I thought things couldn't get more strained between John and me, life threw a curveball. John's dad fell seriously ill. It hit John hard. They were close. Overnight, our already fragile routine got upended. One evening, after a particularly rough visit to the hospital, John slumped into a chair, looking like the world was on his shoulders. Dad's not doing good, Ella. The doctors, they say he needs constant care. I sat beside him, trying to be the supportive wife. I'm so sorry, John. Maybe we can get a nurse to help. He shook his head, his eyes distant. No, I've been thinking. I'm going to take care of him. I'll quit my job and move in for a while. I was stunned. Quit your job, John? Are you sure? What about our bills, the rent for this place? He snapped. This isn't about money, Ella. It's my dad. I need to be there for him. I understood. I really did, but the practical side of me was screaming. And I get that, John, but we need to think this through. We can find another way to help your dad. He wouldn't budge. No, my mind's made up. I'm doing this. So he did. John moved into his parents' place, leaving me alone in our big empty house. Days turned into weeks. I was juggling my job and all our bills while he was. I don't even know what. Every time I called or visited, it was the same scene. John either glued to his phone or the TV, looking exhausted and frustrated. His mom, Mrs. Smith, was always hovering, throwing in her 2 cents. One day, I found him sprawled on the couch, a beer in hand, eyes glued to some game. "John, shouldn't you be with your dad?" He barely glanced at me. "He's sleeping." "What do you want me to do? Sit and stare at him?" I bit back my frustration. "You could look for a part-time job, help out with our expenses." That got his attention. He sat up, angry. "Really, Ella? You want me to work now, while my dad's lying there, dying?" I tried to keep my voice steady. "We're drowning in bills, John. I can't handle everything on my own." His mom walked in then, always perfect timing. "Ella, John is doing a noble thing, taking care of his father. You should be grateful." Grateful? The word hit me like a slap. Grateful I'm keeping our lives afloat while he sits here doing what? Playing caretaker while watching TV and drinking? John stood up, towering over me. "You just don't get it, do you? This is family. Maybe if you had one, you'd understand." That cut deep. Too deep. I walked out, the sound of his mom's tut-tuts chasing me. I drove home, tears blurring my vision. This wasn't the man I married. This was a stranger, living a life I didn't sign up for. The days after John's father passed were tough. I expected things might start to shift back to normal, but they never did. John never went back to work. Instead, he spent more and more time at his mom's place, leaving me alone in our big, expensive house, drowning in bills and loneliness. One evening, I came home from work to find John and his mother, Mrs. Smith, sitting in the living room. The air was thick with tension. I could tell something was up. "Ella, we need to talk," John said, not even bothering to look at me. I set my bag down, feeling a knot in my stomach. "What's going on?" Mrs. Smith, who always had too much to say, started. "We've decided it's best if John and I live here. We can take care of the rent now." I was shocked. "What? This is our home, John. You can't just kick me out." John finally looked at me, his eyes cold. "It's not working, Ella. You and me, this life. I need to start over, and Mom needs a place to stay." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Start over? So you're just going to throw away our marriage just like that?" He shrugged. "It's been over for a while, hasn't it? We're just making it official now." I turned to his mother. "And you? You think you can just come in here and take over my life?" Mrs. Smith stood up, her voice sharp. "It's for the best, Ella. You and John were never a good match. He needs to be with family now." I was seething. "Family? What about me? I'm his wife." John stood up, facing me. "Not anymore. We want you out, Ella. The sooner the better." I looked between them, the betrayal cutting deep. "Fine, I'll go. But don't think for a second that this is okay. You're both making a huge mistake." I packed a bag with my essentials, my hand shaking with rage, and heard as I walked out the door. John's voice followed me. "We're doing what needs to be done, Ella. You'll see, this is for the best." Settling into my new, modest apartment felt like a fresh start. It was small, but it was a place where I could finally breathe, away from the stifling atmosphere of my past life with John and his overbearing mother. The walls were bare and the furniture was minimal, a stark contrast to the lavishness I've left behind. As I was arranging my few belongings, my phone buzzed. It was a message from an old mutual friend of John and me, Laura. "Hey, Ella. Have you heard about John and his mom? They're living it up. Expensive clothes, fancy gadgets. Wonder where all that money is coming from." I stared at the screen, a mix of curiosity and bitterness swirling in me. Where were they getting the money? I thought back to the expensive house, the bills, and the lifestyle they had insisted on. It didn't add up. Shaking my head, I typed a quick reply. No idea, Laura. Good for them, I guess. But the question gnawed at me. I couldn't help but wonder how they were affording such extravagance, especially after kicking me out, and with John not working. A few days later, I ran into another friend, Mike, at the grocery store. He brought it up again. Ella, you won't believe it. Saw John and his mom at the high-end electronics store, buying like there's no tomorrow. Heard they even sold their family home. Crazy, huh? I forced a smile. Yeah, crazy, but inside, my mind was racing. They sold the family home. Was that where the money was coming from? As I unpacked groceries in my kitchen, a small, unadorned space that was now my refuge, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I was moving on, building my life again from scratch, while they seemed to be living in a world of luxury built on what? Lies? Deceit. I sat down at my tiny dining table, a second-hand purchase, and let out a long breath. It didn't matter, I told myself. I was out of that toxic environment, free from their twisted dynamics. But deep down, I knew the truth. It did bother me. It bothered me that they seemed to be thriving after throwing me to the curb. I had worked hard for everything I had, while they seemed to be enjoying a life of ease and comfort. As the evening wore on, I found solace in the quiet of my apartment. It was mine, earned through my own effort and resilience. I had lost much, but I had gained something more valuable. My independence, my sense of self. 4 months into my new life, the past came knocking in a way I never expected. My phone rang one lazy Saturday morning, the caller ID flashing John's name. I hesitated but answered. Ella, we need your help. John's voice was shaky, desperate. I sat up, alert. What's happened, John? It's all gone wrong. We got kicked out of the rental house. Mom and we have nowhere to go. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Kicked out? But I thought you had money. A pause occurred. Ella, the money is gone. His voice drifted off. Dad left debts, not inheritance, as we thought. I experienced a range of feelings, including shock, incredulity, and a slight sense of fulfillment. Were they genuinely wealthy all along, anticipating a substantial inheritance? Really, even for my ex-husband, it was too much. So what do you want from me, John? We were wondering if maybe we could stay with you, just for a while, until we sort things out. I let out a brief, sour laugh. Do you wish to remain with me? After everything? Now John's voice was begging. Please, Ella. There is nowhere else for us to go. Do you recall the happy times? Why don't we just? I interrupted him. Have fun, John. I was kicked out of my own house by you and your mother. Now when things are hard, you can't just crawl back. After a brief period of silence, Ella, I realize I made a mistake. I apologize. We're simply in extreme need. Having made up my mind, I inhaled deeply. I've moved on, John. You and your mother have no place in the new life I've created. You must solve this problem on your own. But Ella, no, John, it's finished. You made your decision. Accept it. With my heart racing, I hung up. I had a wave of empowerment accompanied with a slight melancholy. I had left the world I had known behind, and now John, the guy I had once loved, was only a voice on the other end of the phone. Lara phoned me later. John and his mother were mentioned to me. Are you all right? With a smile, I felt at ease. Yes, I'm doing ok. I am genuinely liberated, Lara. I glanced about my tiny apartment, my haven, as I hung up the phone. Although it was so different from my life with John, it was real. I owned it. I had persevered through the worst and emerged stronger. That night, I came to the realization that this was my new beginning. A life in which I was in charge, and my happiness was independent of other people. Although I had lost a lot, I had also discovered who I was. This is the tale of how my family disintegrated, and my name is Kimberly. It all began when my younger brother, Tommy, was 5 and I was 7 years old. Mom had taken Tommy to his first actual piano lesson, and I can still clearly recall the day. She was virtually floating on air when they returned. "Kim, come here," she said, her voice full of enthusiasm. Wondering what all the commotion was about, I rushed down the stairs. "Your brother is a genius in music." Although I wasn't really sure what that signified, I could tell it was significant. "That's fantastic," I answered, attempting to seem excited. With gleaming eyes, Mom said, "The teacher says he has perfect pitch." Are you aware of how uncommon that is? I have no doubt that he will become a star. It was all about Tommy after that day. In order to concentrate on his profession, Mom abandoned her part-time employment. She would spend hours looking into kid-friendly talent events and music competitions. Our living room became a miniature recording studio, furnished with a microphone, keyboard, and even a tiny karaoke machine. Do not misunderstand, Tommy was good. His voice was clean and pure, like that of a tiny angel when he sang. However, I couldn't help but feel excluded. Mom was too preoccupied with Tommy's possible celebrity status, and Dad wasn't really there. He would go to work before I was up and return home after I had gone to bed. He was too tired to do much else on the weekends, so he would watch TV or tinker in the garage. I therefore learned how to look after myself. I would prepare my own meals, do my assignments without being questioned, and make an effort to keep my troubles to myself. But it wasn't all awful. I had my grandmother, my books, and a few close pals. Mom's mother was Grandma, but they couldn't have been more unlike. Grandma was grounded and pragmatic, but Mom was all about the limelight and celebrity. When I was 12, I began helping out at her little convenience shop in town after school. She would smile at me over her spectacles and remark, "Kimberly, you're a good worker." Astute financial management will benefit you throughout your life. I valued those remarks more than all the ambiguous compliments I received at home. At least someone recognized me as more than simply Tommy's sister. In relation to Tommy, he was flourishing while being cared for by Mom. He had already won a couple local singing contests by the time he was 7 years old. Mom's face would light up with joy when she brought his awards and accolades home. Without waiting for a response, she would ask me, "Did you see Tommy on TV last night?" He was the most gifted child the judges had seen in years, they remarked. I tried to be pleased for my brother by smiling and nodding, but when I saw how differently we were treated, I couldn't help but feel jealous. While I had to save my money for months in order to purchase whatever I wanted, Tommy had access to the newest toys and technology. The gap between Tommy and me widened even further once I started high school. Mom put Tommy in an exclusive private school renowned for its music department, while I went to the neighborhood public school. Taking care of his outfit and reminding him about his voice lessons after school, she would drop him off every morning in our rickety minivan. In the meanwhile, I would have already boarded the early bus and would be halfway to school. When I returned home one day from an especially demanding day of studies and a shift at Grandma's store, Mom and Tommy were seated at the kitchen table, surrounded by flyers and brochures. "What is all of this?" I put my backpack down beside the door and asked. Mom's eyes gleamed with anticipation as she glanced up. "You won't believe it, Kim. Tommy received a call to try out for the National Youth Corps." New York is where the audition is held. We'll have to reserve a hotel, airfare, and new clothes. The question that kept coming to me was, can we afford all that? Mom's smile wavered briefly. We'll get by. We must take advantage of this once-in-a-lifetime chance for Tommy. Knowing better than to argue, I nodded. However, I couldn't help but think as I made my way to my room. What about my opportunities? In a sense, I felt proud of Tommy rather than envious of his skill. However, I had had enough of being treated like an outsider in my own family. I overheard Mom and Dad fighting in their bedroom that evening. I could tell it was about money, even though their voices were muted. Dad was saying, "Linda, we're already in debt. We cannot continue to spend in this manner." However, Mom felt that this may be Tommy's big break. You don't want him to be successful. Dad groaned, "I do, of course, but what about Kim? Nothing has been set aside for her education fund." After a moment, Mom's now softer voice said, "Kim is smart. She'll get scholarships. In addition, she has always been self-sufficient. She will find a solution." Their remarks reverberated in my mind as I laid in bed and stared at the ceiling. She will find a solution. It always came down to that, didn't it? They threw everything into Tommy's future, leaving me to fend for myself. The next day, I went to work at Grandma's store. As I was restocking shelves, Grandma called me over to the counter. "Kimberly," she said, her voice gentle, "is everything all right? You seem distracted today." I hesitated for a moment, then the whole story came spilling out. Tommy's audition, the money problems, my fears about college. Grandma listened patiently, her face growing more concerned with each word. When I finished, she shook her head. "Listen, I've been thinking. You're a hard worker, Kimberly. How would you like to start earning a real wage here at the store? Not just pocket money, but something you could save for your future." For the first time in a long while, I felt seen and appreciated. As I hugged my grandmother, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I could create my own opportunities. I didn't need to wait for someone else to invest in my future. With Grandma's help, I could start investing in myself. As the years went by, I threw myself into my studies and my work at Grandma's store. By the time I was 15, I'd managed to save up a decent amount. My goal? A laptop for school. One Friday afternoon, I decided to count my savings. I went to my closet and pulled out the pink ceramic piggy bank Grandma had given me years ago. But when I shook it, something felt off. The familiar jingle of coins was missing. My heart racing, I opened the bottom and turned it over. Nothing. Not a single coin fell out. With shaking hands, I made my way downstairs. Tommy was sprawled on the couch, playing video games on a shiny new console. "Hey, Tommy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You haven't seen my piggy bank, have you? Or the money inside it?" He barely glanced up from his game. "Nope, sorry." I took a deep breath and headed to the kitchen, where Mom was preparing dinner. "Mom," I began, "did you take the money from my piggy bank?" She turned to me, her face calm. "Oh, that. Yes, I did. Tommy needed a new game console. His old one broke, and he was so upset. I knew you had some savings, so I took it." I stood there, speechless. Tears were threatening to spill, but I refused to let them fall. "When will you pay me back?" I managed to ask. Mom sighed as if I was being unreasonable. "We'll see. Times are tight right now with all of Tommy's expenses. You understand, don't you? This is an investment in his future." I didn't understand. I couldn't understand how she could do this to me. Without another word, I turned and ran out of the house. I kept running until I reached Grandma's store, tears blurring my vision. Grandma took one look at me and flipped the open sign to closed. She led me to the back room and sat me down. "What happened, Kimberly?" she asked gently. Between sobs, I told her everything. As I spoke, I watched Grandma's face change from concern to disbelief to anger. "What am I going to do, Grandma?" I asked, feeling more lost than ever. "I can't trust them." Grandma was quiet for a moment, then she stood up. "Wait here," she said. She disappeared into the front of the store. When she came back, she was carrying a laptop box. "I was saving this for your birthday," she said, placing the box in my lap. "But I think you need it now. Just don't take this home. Keep it here at the store. Use it after your shifts or on weekends. I don't want your mother getting her hands on this too." That night, as I lay in bed, I made a promise to myself. I would never let anyone take advantage of me like that again. I would work harder, save more, and find a way out of this house where I felt like a stranger. My 16th birthday rolled around with little fanfare. Mom remembered the date this time at least. She and Dad wished me a happy birthday over breakfast, Dad sliding a card across the table before rushing off to work. I invited a few close friends. We set up some folding tables in the backyard, strung up some lights, and had a pretty good time. I'd saved up from my job at Grandma's store to buy snacks and drinks. My best friend Rachel helped me decorate with balloons and streamers we got from the dollar store. As we sat around eating chips and laughing about school drama, I caught myself feeling genuinely happy. For a moment, I could forget about the family dynamics and just be a normal teenager celebrating her birthday. But reality has a way of creeping back in. When Tommy's 16th birthday came around 2 years later, it was an extravaganza. They rented out the fanciest restaurant in town, invited what seemed like half the city, and even hired a professional photographer. The cherry on top, a shiny new car parked outside with a big red bow. I stood off to the side during the party, watching Tommy beam as he accepted congratulations and gifts. Despite everything, I couldn't bring myself to resent him. This wasn't his fault. He was just living the life our parents, especially Mom, had orchestrated for him. A few months later, I was thrilled to learn I'd been accepted to study economics at a college in the next state. Even better, I'd earned a partial scholarship. But as I soon discovered, partial was the operative word. The scholarship wouldn't cover all my expenses. With trepidation, I approached my parents one evening. "Mom, Dad," I got into State University for economics. I have a scholarship, but I'll need some help with the rest of the tuition and living expenses." Dad looked up from his newspaper, a crease between his brows. "That's great news about the scholarship, Kim, but you know money's tight right now, with Tommy's music school fees." Mom jumped in. "Kimberly, you're a smart girl. I'm sure you can figure something out. Maybe get a job. You've always been so independent." Defeated, I retreated to my room. As I sat on my bed, staring at the acceptance letter, my phone buzzed with a text. It was Grandma, asking how the conversation with my parents went. I called her back, my voice shaking as I recounted what had happened. Grandma listened quietly, then said, "Kimberly, don't you worry. We'll figure this out together." True to her word, Grandma set up a college fund for me. Between that, my scholarship, and a part-time job, I picked up at a cafe near campus. I managed to make it work. "You're going to do great things," Kimberly, Grandma said. "I'm so proud of you." Those words carried me through the tough times in college when I was up late studying or pulling double shifts at the cafe. If I'd remember Grandma's faith in me, I would push through. I called Tommy occasionally, trying to keep our connection alive. He was at a prestigious music college, all expenses paid by our parents, of course. Despite the differences in our situations, it was nice to hear his voice and to know that at least one person in that house might be missing me. After 4 grueling years of balancing studies, work, and tight budgets, I finally graduated with my degree in economics. Armed with my hard-earned qualifications and a determination to succeed, I returned to my hometown. It wasn't long before I landed a job at a prestigious financial firm and found a small but comfortable apartment to rent. Life settled into a pleasant routine. Work was challenging but rewarding. In my free time, I started to build a life for myself outside of my family's shadow. I made new friends, took up hiking on weekends, and even started dating a bit. Then one rainy Tuesday evening, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find my mother standing there, looking uncharacteristically disheveled. She stepped inside, wringing her hands. "Kimberly, I need your help." Those words sent a chill down my spine. In all my years, I couldn't remember my mother ever asking for my help. "What's wrong?" I asked, leading her to the couch. She sat down heavily, her eyes brimming with tears. "I'm sick, Kim, really sick. The doctors say I need treatment, but our insurance won't cover it all." My heart dropped. Despite everything, she was still my mother. "How much do you need?" $15,000, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know it's a lot, but I didn't know where else to turn. Your father and I, we spent everything on Tommy's education. We thought it would pay off by now, but..." The next morning, we drove to the bank in silence. As we waited in line, Mom started talking, her voice low. "You know Tommy's doing so well," she said. "He's got offers from several big music groups. Once he signs, we'll be able to pay you back in no time." I nodded, only half listening. My mind was racing, thinking about how I'd manage the loan repayments on top of my rent and other expenses. After signing what felt like a mountain of paperwork, I transferred the $15,000 to my mother's account. As we left the bank, she hugged me tightly. A few days later, I was scrolling through my social media feed during my lunch break when I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was Tommy, my brother, posting selfies from the Swiss Alps. She called me every day, her voice a soothing bee to my frayed nerves. "Don't you pay any mind to those fools," she'd say firmly. "They don't know the half of what's been going on in that house all these years." A week after my mother's posts went viral, my phone rang with a number I hadn't seen in years, my father's. "I've been seeing your mother's posts," he began, and I braced myself for the criticism. But then he surprised me. "I want to hear your side of the story, the full story." So I told him everything. The years of feeling overlooked, the incident with my piggy bank, the struggles through college, and finally, the loan and the betrayal that led to the lawsuit. There was a long silence when I finished. Then, to my shock, my father's voice came back thick with emotion. "I had no idea," he said quietly. "Kimberly, I'm so sorry I failed you as a father. I followed your mother's lead for too long. I told myself I was providing for the family by working long hours, but the truth is I was running away from the problems at home. I should have been there for you." Tears were streaming down my face now. This was the most open, honest conversation I'd had with my father in, well, ever. "I've got a lot to make up for," he said. "I know that, but if you're willing, I'd like to try to be the father I should have been all along." As we continued to talk, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a parent in my corner. It wasn't going to fix everything overnight, but it was a start. After our heart-to-heart, Dad decided to take a closer look at the family finances, something he admitted he should have done years ago. He found that Mom had been secretly withdrawing money from their joint account for years, funneling it all into Tommy's career. But that wasn't the worst of it. She'd taken out multiple loans in both their names, all to fund Tommy's pursuits. They were drowning in debt, and Dad had been completely in the dark. The confrontation that followed was explosive. I wasn't there, but I heard about it from the neighbors. There was shouting, the sound of dishes shattering, and finally, the arrival of police cars. In the aftermath, Dad filed for divorce. The proceedings were messy, but in the end, Mom got half of everything, which went straight to paying off her mountain of debt. I maintained my distance from Mom, focusing on rebuilding my relationship with Dad and cherishing the unwavering support of Grandma. Life started to feel normal. Then, about a year after the divorce, Mom's triumphant posts started appearing on social media again. Tommy had graduated from his music college and landed a spot in a famous band. Her captions were full of "I told you so's" and thinly veiled jabs at Dad and me. Some people couldn't see the potential, she wrote, but a mother always knows. Who's laughing now? I made an effort to ignore it. I had recently paid a down payment on my own apartment, was doing well at work, and felt like I was finally on firm ground. Dad was also doing better than I had ever seen him, appearing happier and more at ease. However, life has a tendency of surprising you with unexpected turns. Tommy returned to Switzerland 2 years after his great break. Videos of him partying with his bandmates and glitzy photos of the Alps were all over his social media accounts. In an attempt to show his admirers his vocal range in the freezing air, he then made the decision to record himself singing at the summit of a mountain one frosty morning. It was a catastrophe. He had a bad cold that turned into a dangerous infection of the throat. The harm was done even with the greatest medical attention. Tommy was no longer able to sing. Mom was devastated by the news. Later, her neighbors informed me that they heard yelling and the noises of objects being tossed and shattered coming from her home. They discovered her in complete hysterics when they went to see how she was doing. She continued talking about missed opportunities and dashed hopes, and she didn't recognize anyone. They were forced to call for assistance. A mental health hospital accepted Mom. According to the physicians, she had a major nervous breakdown that had been made worse by years of stress. Tommy, on the other hand, became depressed and resorted to drinking. We weren't sure whether he would survive for months, but with Dad's and my help, he gradually began to improve. In a surprising turn of events, he became sober and applied to colleges to teach music. "I can't sing anymore," he stated to me while drinking coffee. "But maybe I can help other kids who love music do it right, without all the pressure and crazy expectations." I was filled with pride for my little brother. "I think that's a great idea, Tommy." I thought back on the turbulent voyage of the previous several years as I drove home that evening. I considered Tommy discovering a new route, Dad being at last free to pursue his own life, Mom being stuck at the institution, confined in a world she had created, and me. I had defended my position, stood up for what was right, and emerged from the experience stronger.